Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm and sticky welcome to this Farmers Weekly webinar entitled How to Tackle Take All and Protect Winter Cereals. I'm Tim Eaton. I'm the UK Sales Manager at the crop protection company Certis Belchin, and I'm your host for the next hour or so. Thankfully for you, I'm not alone. I'm excited to introduce a fantastic expert panel who are ready to speak to us about take all. First of all, I'll be introducing Chloe Francis. Chloe is a plant pathologist at ADAS. She's been doing this for almost 8 years, managing and reporting a range of field trials, investigating many cereal diseases. Her areas of specialism include cereal plant pathology, with a focus on foliar diseases, take all, and integrated pest management strategies. Next, we have Peter Wilson. Peter is a consultant and agronomist for Ceres Rural. He's based in Suffolk. He has expertise in crop management and farm business strategy. Previously, he spent 10 years as a farm manager for Valecourt, and he's actively involved in running his family's farm. This gives him a fantastic practical understanding of the many challenges facing farmers today. Last but not least, we have Leanne Fowler. Leanne is a key account manager with Certis Belchin, and she specialises in seed treatments. Leanne has several years of experience in crop protection and the seed and seed treatment industry. She has held commercial and operational roles and is a holder of the Basis Seed Seller Certificate. So our plan for this afternoon is that first Chloe is going to introduce take all the disease and the risk associated with it. After that, Peter will talk us through some on-farm experiences and crucial cultural controls of the disease. And then we'll hand over to Leanne to have a look at latitude seed treatment and its role in suppressing the risks associated with take all. After all the presentations, we will open things up for discussion with question and answer session. We already have some pre-submitted questions, so thank you very much to anyone who took the time to do that. Remember, you can ask a question at any time, just submit that, and I'm not sure we'll get through them all, but we'll try and group them together and pick the most relevant ones to be used at the end. We expect this webinar to last an hour, maybe slightly longer. And it will be available on demand for anyone who'd like to see it that can't stay for the whole thing. Okay, so without further delay, let's hand over to our first speaker. Chloe, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I'm going to give an introduction to take all to start off with. So take all is caused by the pathogen Guaiamyces tritici. And this pathogen affects wheat, barley, rye, and some grass species. There is another pathogen that also causes this disease, but this is extremely rare. And this one does also infect oats, but as I said, it's pretty rare. So that's why we can see oats as a good break crop for take all. Average yield losses for take all have been reported to be about 5 to 20%, but can be as much as 50% where take all is particularly severe. And we know that all varieties are susceptible to take all. There's no natural current resistance in the varieties that we've got. But some varieties are more tolerant to infection. So that means they can cope better under disease. We also find that you get a natural suppression. So if you've got a continuous cereal crop, the second and third year will experience the most severe take all symptoms. But once you get to 4 to 5 years, you start to see take all decline within the soil. And that's due to antagonistic microbacteria in the soil competing with the take all pathogen. So in terms of the life cycle, take all is a soil-borne disease. Once you've drilled your autumn crop, you get primary infection of take all, where the pathogen moves from the soil onto the roots of that newly emerged crop, also from infected roots and cereal debris. This is impacted by autumn temperatures. Once you get below about 10 degrees C in the soil temperatures, you'll find that the take all is actually then inactive over the winter. It prefers warmer conditions. As we then go into the spring and soil temperatures start to warm up again, take all becomes more active. And then you get a secondary infection. So this is where the disease spreads directly from root to root. And that's where those patches of take all start to increase. So under severe infestation, you'll find that the roots of the crop are shortened and blackened in colour. They have this rat's tail appearance. And because of that, they're getting reduced water and nutrient uptake. and that's what causes whiteheads in the field. So it's effectively a disease-induced drought symptom. Quite often you'll see them in patches of whiteheads where the crop is struggling to uptake the nutrients and water it needs. So here's a few images. You can see on the left-hand side what a satellite image of an infected field could look like. As I mentioned, it can be quite patchy in nature. You can see it there in the whiter patches of the field. As I mentioned, the whiteheads you get will usually be in a patch of whiteheads when it's takeall that's caused them. Obviously, eye spot can also cause whiteheads. These will tend to be single tillers randomly dispersed across the field. And if it's eye spot, you should also be able to find an eye spot lesion in the stem. If you find a patch that you suspect is takeall, then you can dig up the plants, give the roots a wash, and you should see this infected root system as shown in the slide, where you've got this rat's tail appearance and blackened roots. And if you've got yield mapping, you might also see something like the right-hand side of the image there. Because takeall is quite patchy in nature, you'll see areas of the field significantly impacted in yield, and other areas where there's a perfectly healthy crop. This is a trial image from a trial we did several years ago now, but you can see straight away the symptoms of takeall there in the trials. The area in the middle is still quite green, unaffected, but there's quite severe patches of takeall in there where there's a significant number of whiteheads. Obviously, those areas of the crop are going to be lower yielding, as there's now less green area available during the grain filling period. So quite often you see a drop in grain quality, lower 1,000 grain weight and specific weight, as you get inefficient grain filling from takeall infected plants. So what are some of the key takeall risk factors? There was a lot of work done by AHDB in the late 1990s and early 2000s, which tried to understand takeall and its interactions with different management factors. So it's worth a look if you're interested. It's Project Report 268, but I've got some information from that here. So one of the obvious ones is crop rotation. As I mentioned, when there's a host plant within the soil, the takeall levels increase within the soil. So this graph here is showing on the y-axis the takeall index, also known as severity. And on the x-axis along the bottom, you've got dates from December up until June. And here what they did is dig up plants weekly during that time period and assess the root systems, giving it a score. So you can see in the first wheat crop, in the blue line along the bottom, the takeall index is pretty static and relatively low, around 5. That's out of 100. If you then look at the second wheat crop in green, you can see quite an increase in the takeall index, particularly by the end of the season, where the takeall is certainly increasing, and that's now around 20. And in the third wheat crop, you can see the yellow line even higher, peaking around 30. So that's the importance of rotation. Having cereal crops in sequence can really increase the level of takeall in the soil. Sowing date's also a factor, and that comes down to the autumn temperatures. So as I mentioned, when temperatures are above 10 degrees C in the soil, then takeall will be active. So the earlier you drill, when soil temperatures are warmer, the earlier that takeall can infest and start to have an impact. So this data you can see on the left-hand side when, say, on the 6th of October, the takeall index was just above 50. And this decreases when drilling was delayed into late October. And then there's quite a jump down to the 13th of November, where the takeall index is around 25. Likely because past that point, soil temperatures were much lower and takeall becoming inactive. This data also showed that there was a bigger benefit from latitude at the earlier sowing dates in terms of takeall infection. But actually, when they looked at the yield responses, latitude gave a consistent effect and consistent consistent yield response across all the different sowing dates. We think that's probably because although the latest sowing dates had less takeall infection, they also tend to have smaller root systems. So smaller differences in infection had a bigger impact in yield. And then the climate, another important factor. So I've already mentioned that autumn temperatures are quite important. Getting the temperatures below 10 degrees C in the soil will mean that takeall is less active. But we also need to consider the summer and spring conditions. So this graph is from the AHDB, it's available on their website, and it's looking at the different conditions and what impact that had on yield. So you can see the smallest bar there, the second from the left, was when they had a wet spring and a dry summer. So what that means is in the wet spring, it's much more conducive to take all infection and that secondary infection spreading from root to root within the field. That's because take all enjoys warm, wet conditions. So you're getting more spread of infection. When you then follow that with a dry summer, that basically exacerbates the effect of the take all. So because take all plants have shortened roots, they're less effective at taking up water and nutrients. Combining that with a dry summer means you get these disease-induced drought patches across the field. And that's when you really see take all impacting your crop. This season, we're perhaps seeing a year more like the first bar there, dry spring and dry summer, which sits somewhere in between all of those bars. So we'll have less secondary infection in the spring because the soils would have been quite dry, but the dry summer may exacerbate any symptoms in the field. There's also a few soil type factors to think about. So take all tends to be more severe in lighter soil types, again because they're likely to have less water retaining capacity and lower nutrient status. Equally low nutrient status soils can intensify disease as these shortened roots struggle to get the water and nutrients they need. Take all can thrive in poor drainage systems, so when you've got waterlogging, take all will favour that. And also light and fluffy seedbeds can easily be penetrated by the fungus. So that was a whistle-stop tour of take all. I'll hand back to Tim.
Thank you, Chloe. That was fantastic. Very interesting and very informative, particularly the parts about climate. I think we're all very aware of the extreme weather in all directions that we seem to experience now. So to be able to think about that, how different seasons, different autumns, different winters, different springs affect the take all risk is incredibly relevant. I see, thank you, anyone who sent in a question. We appreciate that. We're going to not do any questions until the end, but I think we've had some about IPM and rotations, etc. So that's very timely, and thank you to those that have sent those, because we're going to hand over to Peter now, who is going to cover some of those areas. Over to you, Peter.
Sorry, I was having a bit of an issue with muting. Evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm going to take you through a few kind of more on-farm practical areas of take all, starting off with kind of the impact of take all and just re-emphasising kind of what Chloe said, basically, and then also then moving on to some cultural controls, and then also on some areas where farms occasionally slip up or have some issues where I think everyone obviously knows the risk of take all, but with the changing climate and everything else going on, just a few places it can slip in. So if we start with the take all impacts, obviously this is kind of repeating with Chloe, but between 5 and 20% of yield loss, which is huge, but it can get as much as 50%. So I thought it'd be interesting just to put some figures to that. So as you can see, in a kind of mild severity and a small yield loss, it's still £72 a hectare, which is still significant. But in the most severe cases, it can be up to £880 a hectare, which obviously that is a huge loss and has a huge impact on farm profitability and gross margins. You'll all probably appreciate the eagle-eyed ones. 180 to £200 tonne is the range. I think we'd all wish that was still the case. So these numbers, the numbers are a little bit old. So moving on to the other impacts of take all is the main one, but sort of just note some of the others. Obviously, corn grain quality is an issue. It can also affect specific weight and whether it meets milling spec. Premiums for milling are very strong at the moment, so it can have a huge impact in that. Another issue, uneven crop maturity, reduces straw yield. It can also increase the lodging risk, and also a bad take all here can then linger on for future crops. So although yield is by far the biggest impact, there are a few others just to bear in mind when you're thinking about take all. So moving on to I've got to focus on the cultural controls. Obviously, as kind of Chloe said, there's a couple of main ones. The two main ones, crop rotation is the biggest one by far. Less long runs of susceptible crop will have a huge impact on the inoculum left in the soil. But also drilling date, delayed drilling. Okay, I know it's not always desirable, and come on to it a little bit later. The climate is making delayed drilling a bit trickier. But those two, as I see it, are the kind of main two controls, which will give you really, really good control of tackle. But I thought, again, worth mentioning some of the other controls available, or some of the other points to think about when you're thinking about your tackle risk and your control. So straw chop and spreading and the cultivation strategy. The better you can chop your straw, the more evenly, and the more even you spread, you stop getting those balls of roots, so you stop getting the patches of inoculum. It's much better to be spread all over the field. And it's also then cultivating does help. If you're cultivating and taking the old roots away from the new roots, also helps the inoculum. It also helps stop the inoculum. So on that, ploughing is probably the best cultivation you can do. That being said, as it's a light land, it especially hurts light land. Ploughing can also give you quite light, fluffy soils, which can also help increase the spread of the inoculum. So hence why rolling in the winter and spring can be key as well. I think if you can get a nice, good consolidated seed bed to allow the roots to get down, and again, in the spring, useful if you've had some frost heave or the soils look light and fluffy in the spring, a spring roll can really help with tackle. There's also the control of volunteer cereals and grass weeds in other crops. Obviously, you don't want to have crops that can carry the susceptible crops that can increase the inoculum in your break crops. So that's obviously quite a key one. Variety choice also can play a difference. Some varieties are better as a second wheat than others. Also then seed rate. Seed rate, actually, the higher the seed rate, the easier the inoculum can spread in the soil. So that might seem a little bit against it, but actually high seed rates can cause an issue. Although organic fertilizer applications don't actually necessarily take down the tackle risk, they can help by producing a healthier crop and giving the crop better nutrition earlier, which also leads us on to placing fertilizer at planting. That can obviously help because you're giving the roots the best possible chance. And again, the same with spring nitrogen applications. I think if you think you're at risk of a tackle on a second or third wheat, early spring nitrogen is got to be the way to go. And I've put the last one as a spring fungicide. I fully admit it's not a cultural control, but Astrobilurin at T0 or T1 can seriously help with tackle as well. So I thought I'd then just touch on the main two controls and go into them in a bit more detail. So obviously rotation, like I said before, is the best by far, and 1 year break from a susceptible crop usually prevents any significant issues in the following crop. So if you were to break your wheat rotation or your white straw rotation up with a brassica or a non-white straw crop, you should not then see any issues apart from in extreme circumstances in the following crop. And then, as again Chloe touched on, drilling date have a large impact on taking an inoculum after harvest. So hopefully you can all see the table. As you can see, straight after harvest or within 50 days, the inoculum level in the soil is very high. Therefore, you're likely to get a high tackle risk. And then the later you leave it, so when you're getting towards the end of February, the end of October, your later drilling, the level of inoculum in the soil is a lot lower, therefore reducing your risk of tackle. So they are kind of a very quick whistle-stop tour of kind of the cultural controls of tackle. And then lastly, just a few kind of scenarios where I think we potentially see tackle issues on farm. The first one is probably my main one that I tend to see issues is where you've had a late change in rotation. For example, a failed rape has then gone into a cereal or gone into a second wheat, and you haven't necessarily, it's been a kind of a last minute decision. You haven't thought about kind of everything else, and that's an easy one for tackle. And another kind of scenario on a similar one is a late failed oilseed rape where you've put spring barley. And although you won't necessarily see a lot of take-all in the spring barley itself, you might then see a bad take-all in the kind of first wheat, or what would have been a first straw crop after the spring barley. So that's definitely one to kind of just bear in mind if you are making any late cropping rotation changes, that you're just bearing take-all in mind. Block drilling, again, big farms or some big farms, large area to cover, even though you kind of know that odd fields might have a susceptible risk, but it makes sense while you're there. You want to just kind of get on and drill them, which obviously earlier than you might want to, also creates a big risk. Then changing climate. So again, I think we're all aware that the autumn drilling windows now are getting very small. So there is that want to push forward and get in a bit earlier, which again, although we're kind of fighting black blast control as well, obviously the earlier drilling is going to affect the take-all risk. Warmer, milder winters, again, Chloe touched on this. This is creating a better environment for take-all to increase, or the inoculum to increase. So that also that we do seem to be having a lot of milder, warmer winters, which is going to cause a problem. And as you're probably all acutely aware of now, the extremes in spring weather, drought conditions make take-all, exacerbate the take-all issue, and we're certainly seen that this year. And then just thought I'd touch on a little bit the cost. And one of the things, obviously, we want to talk about of seed dressing. It can look a little bit expensive on the surface bit, but at £40 to £50 a hectare, if you look back to my first kind of slide, that was the least severe case of it, was still giving you a hit of more than 40 to 55. So 45 to 50 for a seed treatment. The only thing I would suggest is, just because you kind of have to spend a bit more money on your seed when we're drilling, and if it's ordered, it can lead to kind of putting lower, because of the cost of the seed, lower than suboptimal seed numbers at sowing. So that's just another thing to be aware of. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Peter. That puts the potential yield losses that you mentioned at the start really put things into perspective. I always remember that when I was first taught about take-all, I was told that it was first identified in Australia, and hence it literally took the crop, which presumably was a very thin, droughted crop anyway, and hence they named it take-all. And yeah, you're talking, potentially seeing 50% losses here, completely devastating. And then the other thing that struck me that you were just talking about with rotations there, because obviously the control of take-all begins long before you plant any crop in planning your rotation. And whilst we would like to think we are planning very diverse rotations, it seems like we're getting more and more limited options, with oilseed rape not viable in many places, weed control in some crops becoming more and more difficult. You suddenly find yourself thinking, well, there I am stuck with another cereal. So the challenges become greater as we go from year to year. Finally, after she's waited patiently, we will hand over to Leanne to have a little look at seed treatments.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and good evening, everybody. So we've just heard from Chloe and from Peter about how devastating take-all can be, both the losses, both yield and financial losses, and of course the other impacts that Peter just mentioned, like grain quality and issues for future crops. Now, Peter also spoke there about the cultural controls that form part of a fully integrated approach to managing this disease. And what I'm going to talk about now for the next few minutes is the next step of that IPM plan, the chemical control. So, of course, the chemical control is Latitude. And Latitude is a specific seed treatment for the reduction of take-all. So it's 125 grams of the active ingredient, silthiafam, and goes on at a rate of 2 litres per tonne. Now, it's available in 3 different pack sizes, a 30 litre, a 200 litre, and a 600 litre, so that there is a pack size to suit every processing situation. And of course, it's the only registered crop protection product with take-all actually on the label. So it has a well-proven efficacy for maximising yield and quality from over 100 trials in every possible agronomic situation it's been trialled. So latitude gives the grower a practical tool to aid the management of second and subsequent wheats and barley without any delay to crop emergence. So how does it work? Latitude is specifically designed, as I just said, for the reduction of take-all. It has a novel mode of action that disrupts the fungal energy production by acting on the cell respiration. So it targets the take-all fungus actually in the root zone, stopping its early growth and therefore reducing the infection level. So once it's in contact with the soil, it then moves rapidly off the seed, but then slowly through the profile. And it creates this kind of zone of protection around those developing roots of each seedling during the plant's most vulnerable early growth stage. So now this early protection is crucial because once those roots are colonized, the fungus can spread rapidly via runner hyphae. So our trials have shown that latitude treated crops have less root blackening and better developed root systems, which enhances the water and nutrient uptake throughout the season. Okay, flexibility and drilling dates. So we've already heard that drilling later when the soil temperatures are below 10 to 12 degrees C is an important cultural control. Now using latitude allows for greater flexibility with that drilling date. So our extensive trials over the many years that we've done it has shown that you can drill up to 2 weeks earlier than you normally would in a high risk situation when using this latitude seed treatment. So I mentioned, I think it was on the last slide, about this protective zone around the roots. That reduces that early pathogen attack. Now it's preserving the integrity of that root system during this very vulnerable window. Now this feature of latitude is particularly valuable in very uncertain weather situations like we seem to all be experiencing more of. By using latitude as a kind of like insurance policy, so that when that weather window opens up, you can get out there and not have to hold off. So one thing I really wanted to share with you was the calculators we have, the latitude calculators. So on the Certis Belgium website, we do have this handy calculator that helps growers to evaluate if latitude seed treatment can deliver a profitable return. This online calculator is designed to help growers accurately identify the benefit of using the seed treatment. And it's been built by using the data from all those trials I mentioned earlier. So that's over 100 trials over a span of about 10 years and across a variety of drilling dates and soil types. I think the initial idea of the tool, I believe it came from feedback from growers who were asking for an easy to use calculator to help them to make sort of better informed decisions regarding protecting their crops. And it was launched to simplify the way in which those growers can decide on the best approach to protect those crops against the threat of take-all. Now, we developed this latitude calculator in a way that you, as growers, can put your own numbers in. You'll need to enter the estimated crop price, the cost of the seed treatment, and the seed rate you'll be using. And the results that you'll get will provide you with an accurate picture of the cost benefit of using latitude, and it's tailored to your own individual circumstances. I think as farms become increasingly more squeezed in terms of costs and growers are evaluating every single expense they have, having this tool, it's a simple tool to compare the cost of seed treatment against the expected return on investment. It's just really important. So what I've got on the screen there is, if hopefully you can see it, is a QR code that's displayed there. So if you zap it with your phone, it will take you directly to the page so that you can use the calculator yourself. Or alternatively, if you can't see the screen at the moment, if you're sort of listening to this in a tractor or while you're doing your shopping or whatever, you're using it on playback, all you need to do is go to the Certis Belgium UK website, and you'll find this calculator listed under the products drop down. So as I mentioned earlier on in the slides, there have been lots and lots of latitude trials over the last few years. And some of those trials have actually been conducted by ADAS and even Chloe herself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hand back to Chloe, to run us through a particular trial that happened around 2 years ago. Chloe?
Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.
So yeah, we did a trial kindly funded by KWS and Certis in 2022. And the aim of this trial really was to look at the interaction between variety and seed treatment. So we had 4 different varieties: Palladium, Dorsum, Zaya and X-Days. And each were drilled just with a single purpose dressing and then also with the seed treatment latitude. This was second week crop and the drill date was the 11th of October. So we did see quite a high infestation of take-all in this trial, and that was shown here in the drone image. I think I saw symptoms start at the end of May, and the crop did look terrible, to be honest. There was large patches of stunting crop, lots of whiteheads, and it was really struggling from drought. And again, that was due to the dry conditions through the summer. You can see in the drone image that there is some variation across the trial, which you'll always get in take-all trials. Sort of the top rep at the top there, still quite green. The next line down of plots were struggling in particular, looking quite pale by this point. If we look at the first rep at the bottom there, we can see some clear differences from latitude. So I've labelled each pair of plots as the same treatment, and I've labelled them with the initials of the variety and the seed treatment. So from bottom left, you've got Dorsum without any latitude, and next to it is X-Days, both looking quite pale in colour. Then you've got Zayat with latitude compared to Zayat without. And I think you can see there that there is more green area left where latitude was applied. Then moving across, you've got X-Days plus latitude, E plus L, next to Dorsum plus latitude. Again, both looking a lot greener in colour than where those varieties were drilled without latitude. And finally, the Palladium on the middle of that slide, next to Palladium plus latitude. And yeah, it's quite clear in the field, we could see and pick out treatments where latitude was applied. This is what the plots look like from above. So this was the X-Days. You can see on the left-hand side, just a single purpose dressing. The crop was struggling. You can see a lot of whiteheads in the crop there and not much green leaf area remaining. On the right-hand side where latitude was applied, you can see the crop looking a lot healthier. You've still got some whiteheads. Latitude can't completely prevent take-all, but it will reduce the level of primary infection. And then you can see here that that plot there has got more green area remaining. So it's going to be able to do more grain filling than the plot on the left. And we took that through, so we did the disease assessment on take-all by digging up plants and assessing the root area that was infected. So here you can see a pair of bars for each of the different varieties, starting with Palladium on the left-hand side to X-Days on the right. Within each pair of bars, you've got the single-purpose dressing initially in the blue bar. You can see here that in that single-purpose dressing, X-Days had quite a higher level of take-all severity than any of the other varieties. As I mentioned earlier, there's no resistance to take-all, but some varieties are just better at tolerating disease than others. And we can see here that clearly X-Days was more affected by the level of infection. Although there's no resistance rating in the recommended list, it is worth looking at the second wheat yields. Any varieties that are maintaining a high yield in that second week position will suggest that they are more tolerant to diseases such as take-all and eye spot. You can also see in this slide that the second bar on each of those pairs, the turquoise bar, where latitude was applied, reduced the level of take-all consistently across all 4 varieties. We also took the trial to yield. So again, you can see differences in the untreated yield, so the single-purpose dressing in blue. Again, the X-Days, unsurprisingly, had the lowest yield at 5 tonnes per hectare as the most impacted variety by take-all. And as a result, it's already got a large yield response to latitude at almost 2 tonnes per hectare. But again, all 4 varieties you can see a clear benefit from the addition of latitude in this case, with an average yield response of 1.4 tonnes per hectare. So under what was quite high disease pressure, we did see that large yield response. And clearly in this case, latitude was worth applying. That's all from me. I'll hand back to Tim.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you, Chloe. That last slide was was very telling. And I think Leanne mentioned about the use of latitude being a potential insurance, because as Chloe outlined, the risks associated with take-all vary from year to year. But if you're potentially looking at a yield loss of two ton per hectare without using a seed treatment, then yeah, the seed treatment very quickly looks quite cheap. Yeah, it's you've got to take in a lot of factors, but whilst making a decision about whether to grow that second or third wheat, and then whether to use a seed treatment to help mitigate the risk of take-all. Thank you everyone for the presentations. We've had some polls going on whilst everyone was talking, and it was interesting to see that when you were all asked about is take-all an issue on your farm, 25% of you say it's a moderate issue, 56% it's a minor issue, and not an issue at all for 18% of you. So for the you 18%, I hope we're keeping you interested as we witter on about take-all here. And then I suppose it's linked to this really. Are you confident in identifying take-all? Only 22% of people are very confident. Nearly 60% are somewhat confident, and then 13.6% not confident. Only 4.5% of you rely on your agronomists, which is good to see. And then, what do you consider the biggest driver of take-all risk on your farm? And the first option was second or third wheat. So 70% of you. I mean, I think it's been clear in all the presentations that rotation here. We probably wouldn't be here if talking about this if no one was growing a second or third wheat. And then the final question is very much related to this. Which cultural control do you use most consistently? Obviously, crop rotation was 70% of you. Delayed drilling, as Peter has highlighted, was the next most popular. Weed control and soil health improvements didn't get any votes at all, I'm afraid. And then the final question was to do with latitude seed treatment. What is the most important factor when deciding to use latitude? 12.5% of people would say a history of take-all. And I think, I'm not sure we've really mentioned, I think I would certainly say that if you have a history of take-all in a field or a block of land, then I think that's a pretty relevant factor. Crop value also covered 12.5% of you. But of course, the same again, 62.5% of you said the position of the crop in the rotation was the most important factor. So thank you for taking part in those. Interesting, and provides us all with some interesting feedback on what you're all thinking. So I'm going to move on to some questions we've had. First of all, the first question is aimed at Peter, really. The current wheat market is pretty depressed, which is not much fun for any of us. I think feed wheat is less than £170 a tonne. So would you say in that market it's worth bothering with a seed treatment for take-all?
I mean, the easiest, and like I say, it's very apt with Leanne's cost analysis on her page. But yeah, I mean, my honest answer would be yes. I think we've still got to bear in mind, I know even though prices are low, getting these crops to perform is still key. So if latitude is going to help and the seed treatment is going to help, then it's what we've got to look at. And certainly you've just got to look at your risk factors and when you're drilling. But certainly if you're worried about take-all and you've got good conditions to do, I definitely think you've got to push for yield. So the seed dressing, although can look expensive, the cost over benefit is far in favour of using it.
Leanne, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a really good scenario where we can talk about the latitude calculator again. So I had a look earlier on, and just a really quick example. So based on a crop price of around £165 per tonne, I've put a latitude price in as £225 per tonne, and I've put a fairly robust seed rate of 250 kilos per hectare. I had a look at what results that the calculator was suggesting there, and it says that the gross margin from a latitude medium take-all risk scenario was at £34.50 per hectare, and the yield needed to cover that cost is 0.34 tonnes a hectare. So this is the beauty of when you are scratching your head a bit and wondering what the right decisions are. The beauty of this calculator is you can really put your own numbers in and truly find that unique situation for your scenario.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Chloe, I think this is a question for you. Someone had asked that they use brassicas and legumes as break crops, but obviously you can only grow so much of those. They're aware that grass and barley harbour take-all, even if they're not so much impacted themselves by it so much. Oat is a good break from take-all. So the question really was, is maize a genuine break crop from take-all? There seems to be a range of answers circulating around the industry.
Yeah, so yeah, maize would be a good break for take-all. It's not a host plant. I think your only issue really with it being in a serial rotation is fusarium carryover. But yeah, for take-all, it should, provided you've controlled any volunteers within that crop, it should give you a good break.
There you go. Yeah, no, simple. Thank you very much. And then another, I think this is, I'm not sure with Chloe or Leanne really, is latitude still the most effective seed treatment for take-all? Taking into account that droughts are more prevalent and protecting and generating deeper roots will be so important in maintaining yield, then take-all and its effects will be more than ever need to be avoided and controlled. Therefore, I'm not sure I'm quite understanding the question. In this endeavour, of course, rotation with winter beans would also help, but then weed control becomes a problem. So really, the question there is really with the first word: is latitude still the most effective seed treatment for dealing with take-all?
So I guess if I start off and then I'll hand over to Chloe. So yes, of course, it is, as I said earlier on, the only seed treatment that's been specifically designed for the reduction of take-all. Of course, you need to use it alongside some of the cultural controls that we have talked about. And again, goes back to my slides earlier, but it's the only one that does have take-all on the label. So yes, absolutely, it's definitely relevant and well placed.
Yeah, as Jan said, it's the only available seed treatment at the moment that gives you take-all control. If it is going to get more difficult to control take-all, that'll be even more important to continue to use those integrated management strategies. So I wouldn't just rely on latitude itself. You'd include a few different strategies to help keep on top of take-all. So thinking about what variety you're doing, and yes, we've discussed the rotation and delaying sowing. So you've got a few tools there to help.
That's good. And then, perhaps Peter, we've had some questions around sort of applications of phosphites and biostimulants, etc. Would you say there's some benefit and some help coming from there?
Yeah, I think easy answer, yes, but I don't think necessarily it's having an impact on the take-all itself and the inoculum, but they should have a kind of help in overall plant health and rooting, which is going to be more important for the crop. So basically, the healthier you can make that crop and the better rooting you can make that crop, the better it will cope with the take-all, basically. So yes, basically you won't necessarily see a reduction in the take-all, but they should help the plant deal with it better.
Yeah, I guess it's not perhaps not a traditional cultural control, but if you are aiding rooting, then you are giving the plant the best chance, aren't you? So
yeah, exactly.
There you go. Okay, and then Chloe, we've had some questions around sort of longer serial rotations, and I guess it's really asking about take-all decline. One specific question is saying what sort of impact might take-all have on winter barley when it's the third cereal after 2 weeks? And then another question is saying, if you've used latitude in years 2 and 3, what would you expect in year 4? Does the use of the seed treatment become less relevant in year 4?
Yeah, so for the first question, barley tends to be less impacted by take-all than wheat. And we think it's because it puts out a few more crown roots than wheat, but it's also maturing earlier in the season. Its grain fill is earlier in the season, so it's not as impacted by the dry conditions towards the end. So in June and July, it doesn't get as impacted by drought. So as a third cereal, I think barley, yeah, it should be all right. If you've got a lot of take-all in your second wheat, then perhaps just keep an eye out for take-all in your barley crop, but you might want to include latitude. to be on the safe side. But yeah, as I say, it should be less impacted than the third week would be.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to what we mentioned just now about field history. Yeah, have you seen take all in that field, and specifically in the previous crop? Yeah, barley can certainly be affected, can't it? So yeah, but then yeah, take all decline you would expect to kick in from year 4 onwards.
Yes, 2 and 3 tends to be the biggest impact for take all. Yeah, when you've got the most severe levels in the soil, and 4 or 5 you should start to see it levels decrease.
Yeah. Peter, there's a question for you here, which you touched on, I think. Does direct drilling, rather than ploughing, lessen the effects of take all?
So yeah, I mean, simple answer: direct drilling, yes. You'd argue, should have more of an effect on take all, or take all should be more prevalent in direct drilling scenario. But also, with, like I touched on earlier, ploughing's not necessarily it can go the other way as well. The key bit is having a nice firm consolidated rooting zone. So ploughing might give you a very light, fluffy seedbed. So although you've buried the kind of residue, so you should reduce the inoculum, because it's light and fluffy, it's then actually allowed it to move more in the soil. Whilst your direct drilling, technically, yes, you would say would be more, but direct drilling tends to be firmer, better consolidated seedbeds. So although I'd say yes, ploughing is it's not as simple as to say one is definitely better than the other. I think it very much depends on your soil type and your system and how you're using those techniques.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And there's so many variables that it's more complicated than going one drilling method over another is going to control take all better. But yeah, you can certainly think along those lines, can't you, about what sort of seedbed you're left with. There's been some questions around something, Peter, you mentioned to do with fungicide applications. Are there any particular T0 fungicides which are really helping with ease the burden of take all?
Obviously, I think the strobilurins are the one you're looking, and if you're looking for a kind of name, the main one most people would associate with being good for take all, Amistad, is the one that I think most people would say is the best one you can use still for take all, or to help with take all. That's
good, thank you. Chloe, I think this is for you, and I'm not sure how much direct research you'll have. Can you explain why winter wheat following spring barley seems to be particularly at risk of take all? The person asking the question is regularly seeing this in Northern Ireland.
It's a good question. I'd be interested to know what was before the spring barley, whether that's is that the second cereal, or because I suppose if the spring barley's followed cereal crops, then you'll still get carryover of take all, even though it's a spring crop. Yeah, it will help to carry the take all through that spring barley and then into the following winter wheat crop. If you've got a good break crop before the spring barley, I'd expect to see lower levels, but yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I suppose potentially in Northern Ireland, spring barley harvested later, so less days before another crop is planted.
Yeah, like quite close between the two crops.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're starting to come through the questions. What have we got here? I understand the soil temperature issue, but on my heavy ground, the earlier I can drill a second wheat crop, the better. Last year, the rain began on September the 20th. I think a lot of us can remember that. It was, biblical rain that came. And then we couldn't drill again till November, when then drilling was in very poor conditions. So we can't afford to wait this autumn. Would you recommend a drill date of September the 20th or 25th? Or, around that sort of range? Peter, I guess that's for you, really. When would you recommend everybody drills their wheat?
I mean, that's a tricky question, isn't it? I think, and I don't want to dodge the subject here, but I think almost impossible to answer. It depends on too many other factors you've got going on. Have you got grass weed problems? If take all's your only concern, then yes, drilling in and drilling a suitable variety that's good for early drilling would be fine in September. But if you've got other concerns and take all isn't the only one you're worried about, then clearly delayed drilling is needed. So I'm afraid of not wanting to cop out too much on the subject. I just think it's without knowing the farm and knowing the scenario and everything else around it, it's a very hard question to answer. I'm afraid.
But I think from my personal experience, I almost feel like 10 years ago, just talking about blackgrass, people were becoming more and more confident that they could wait and wait and wait to drill. And then in the last 10 years, nearly everyone has come unstuck somewhere, drilling very late. And so these decisions have got so much harder, haven't they? We can't afford to wait. So you've got to try and mitigate with every other control that you have, I guess.
And I think it's probably, if you've gone on that, it's the get your first weeks in. If your takel's your main worry, get your first weeks in first, get them in good conditions, and then play a tune with your second weeks on. If you know you've got any field histories, just try and think about the kind of bigger picture as much as you can. But yeah, as long as if you can get your first weeks in first and then start on your seconds, then at least you're delaying them slightly, so that should help reduce. But yeah, like I say, it's a tricky question without knowing a lot more history about the farm.
For sure. Chloe, did you have something there?
I was just going to say what Peter just said, to be honest. So then it becomes important to prioritise, doesn't it? And put in those lower risk crops first, and then put in delay your higher risk crops, your second wheats or your crops that are struggling for blackgrass, for example.
Okay. No, thank you, guys. Chloe, I think we'll take this as the final question. Someone's asked about what you were saying about particular wheat varieties being more tolerant of take all. Can you share some insight on what people should be selecting here?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's not that much information. I know Rothamsted are doing a lot of work on it to see if they can improve breeding for take all. So at the moment, it's just sort of growth habits that make certain varieties more tolerant or not tolerant to the disease. As I mentioned, we found that X days was particularly susceptible, and I wondered if that was because it's quite a forward variety, so potentially it's putting its roots down a bit quicker than the other varieties potentially, and getting infected earlier. And yeah, as I mentioned, a good way to look at the AHDB recommended list second wheat yields. And any that are holding their yield under that second week position, they should be more tolerant to diseases like take all and also eye spot under those conditions.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I'd
just like to comment on that one, if I may. So what Chloe mentioned about the HDB recommended list, I think that's a really good place to start. So one thing I did recently was on a nice graph, I plotted the yield as first wheat and yield as second wheat, and then as a rule, anything that appears in the top right hand corner above the line are really better second wheats. And I think from memory, the few that popped up were Hexton, I think Bamford were in there, and I think Champion were in there as that sort of top sort of corner of the graph, so to speak. But I think that's a really good exercise to look at, is comparing the first and the second yield from the HDB recommended list.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you very much. And I was just going to say that the Rothamsted research is really interesting, but it's got a way to go, hasn't it? I think they're working with some ancient varieties to try and breed some tolerance back in. But yeah, they're a little way off having something for the recommended list just yet, I think, or something that yields at a sort of viable level. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Okay, guys, I think that's about all we have time for tonight. Thank you very much to Chloe, Peter, Leanne for giving up your time this evening to talk to us all. This webinar recording will soon be available on demand, and everyone who's registered will get an email to let them know when that's ready to be viewed. I hope your time has been well invested this evening, and that you go away with a greater understanding of take all and some food for thought to do with your cropping, rotation, and agronomic decisions. On behalf of the panelists and myself, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today. Good night and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.